Hello, everybody. My name is Anton Treuer, and I'm a college professor, an author, an Indigenous language advocate, and I'm also a racial equity educator. My native name is Wagush, which means fox. I'm from the Eagle Clan, and I come from Leech Lake, which is an Ojibwe reservation in northern Minnesota. Today, I'd like to address the question, why is talking about race so hard? To me, race is a very complex topic. It is shifting and it means different things to different people. But I could summarize my view on this as three main things. One, we all have blind spots. Two, we often misunderstand one another. And three, fear. I'll address each of these in an effort to unpack one of the most important topics of our time. First of all, we all have blind spots. We're like fish. We can see everything perfectly in our environment, except for the glass bowl that confines us. And oftentimes here we are swimming along, being the best version of ourselves, and bonk, we run into the glass bowl. Someone's upset with us, we get misunderstood, it's frustrating, and we want to retreat from that conversation or relationship, place, or people. So in order to navigate in that environment, we really need to develop some sonar. And sonar is sound waves going out and sound waves coming back. It's a conversation and communication with people who've had experiences different from our own. I'll give you an example. My wife and I have been married for many years now, and we have an interracial marriage. I'm Native American. She's from what I often call the Swedish American tribe, blonde hair, blue eyes. We live in rural northern Minnesota, and we both like to go for a run. Now, when I go for a run, I usually don't feel unsafe. I mean, sometimes there's somebody texting and driving, but they're on the opposite side of the road. I can see if they're swerving, and I have an opportunity to get out of the way. Once in a great while, somebody slows down and kind of takes a hard look at me, and I feel uncomfortable, but I never feel truly unsafe. Now, my wife has a very different experience. For her, when someone slows down to take a look or pulls off to the side of the road to check their cell phone like you're actually supposed to do, well, her heart starts to race. She starts to think, should I run into the woods? Should I go back? Is this going to be a sexual assault? And ultimately, she, first of all, the data says, is not as safe as me, doing the same activity as me. And I know for a fact that she doesn't feel as safe as me, doing the same activity as me. And guess what? I actually happen to be a good guy. I work at a university. I chair search committees. When I do that, I make sure that at least half the people on every committee are women. And still, even though I didn't ask for it, and I'm not blind to it, I receive this unearned benefit, a privilege by the accidents of my birth that makes me safer and helps me feel safer doing the same activity as her. And that's not fair. However, when we get into cars, the roles reverse. My wife can be cruising 43 and a 30, and there might be a cop on the corner going like this, "Keep it down, pretty little miss." I am a fuddy-duddy professor dude who has been pulled over by the police over 40 times. I was pulled over twice this past year for no seatbelt while wearing a seatbelt in broad daylight. I told the police officer each time, I'm wearing my seatbelt, and was not believed and told, "Oh, you are now." The first time I took my wife camping, I already had children. We have a big blended family. And I had a newer Honda. We got pulled over by the cops. It was kind of cold. roll the window down. I had my safety protocol, my, registration and insurance card and everything were right in the visor. So I didn't have to, reach for something in a glove compartment, handed it to the officer. And he seemed not to be able to believe that I owned that car. He said, "What is your name?" I told him the name. It's written right there on the registration and the driver's license. He'd say, "Who owns this car?" I said, "It's me." And I gave him my name again, you know, and then he kept repeating, "Who owns this car?" And then he would lean over to my wife and say, "Ma'am, are you okay? Are you sure you're okay?" And she assured him, "Yes, I'm fine. Everything's fine. It's getting cold. The kids are starting to cry." And he says, "Get out." And I remember thinking I could say, well, I have a Fifth Amendment protection from unreasonable searches and seizures. There's no probable cause here. But that would just get him more upset and more likely to keep us there longer or mistreat me. So I got out of the car, opened up the trunk. Pretty soon he's going through all of the camping gear. It's strewn all over the ditch. And then he goes back up to the car to talk to my wife while I'm standing around by the trunk. "Ma'am, are you sure that you're okay? Is there anything you need?" You know, kept us there for, I don't know, 40 minutes. And then handed me back my license and registration and said, "You know what? Have a nice day." I had to turn to my wife after I got all our stuff back in the car and say, "Are you sure you want to date me? Because this won't be the first time." In my community, our chief of police is actually a friend of mine, and he's great. He believes in community policing. He shows up to our courageous conversations about race. I even convinced him to put bilingual signage on the cop cars. And so there it says in the Ojibwe language, my tribal language, "Ganawainjigang Minawa na Damagang," to protect and serve. And still, I've been pulled over 40 times by his team. These are facts, and the data bears them out. And guess what? My wife happens to be a nice person. She doesn't ask to be safer than me, doing the same thing as me. She doesn't ask to be less harassed than me, doing the same thing as me. But she has that experience. I think one of the things that's difficult with regard to blind spots is if you're a person of color and you are, for example, racially profiled, you have a pretty good idea what just happened. But for my wife, when she's driving around, there isn't a big flashing sign that says, "You were just not racially profiled." And so it's hard to see. It's naturally a blind spot. Just like for me, it's hard to see when I go have a nice run that I actually received some unearned benefit while I was having my nice run. It was just a nice day. But it's helpful when we can engage with one another's perspectives and try to see where the patterns are. That's what I mean by developing sonar. Sound waves going out, sound waves coming back. The second driver for the difficulty many of us have in really talking about race has to do with misunderstandings. There's a colleague of mine named Cortland Butts who does a lot of work with the National Summit for Courageous Conversation about Race, and he has a perfect analogy for this. He'll hold up his finger and he'll say, "What is this?" And he'll say, "I could start a fight unless we clarify the language that I'm using to talk about this." For example, in the language of body parts, indeed, that's a finger. But in the language of numbers, it's a 1. And in the language of space, that's up. So who's right? And of course, they are all right. It's a matter of the language, the context that we're using to talk about things. Oftentimes, when a difficult topic like race pops up, someone's up there saying, "This here is a finger, it's not an elbow, it's not a toe. The rest of you, shh." And someone else is listening going, "That's a 1, not a 2. See, they just don't understand." And we totally miss each other and also disengage from one another. And we drop the effort at developing some sonar, the sound waves going out and coming back. There are many, many difficulties we have that drive the misunderstandings. So another one is that race is really complex and it often means different things to different people. Of course, humans made up race. When the Irish first came to America, they were considered non-white. The Italians were considered non-white, but eventually the definition of whiteness changed and included them. The same thing is happening right now with the Latinx population, which is racially diverse, and many people within that population are being kind of pulled into whiteness and how they are viewed, deemed, and incorporated into broader society. So race operates at multiple levels. At the micro level is the stuff that is easiest for most people to see. So that would be individual racist acts like a racial slur and things like that. Most of us can see that and say, that's not okay. But it also operates at the meso level. And there I'm talking about systems, policies, and procedures. And then it also operates at another level, at the macro level, which is kind of like this cultural smog that we're all breathing all the time. I'll give you a quick example of each. So at the micro level, I had an experience when I was in first grade where I was the only brown kid in my class. And my first grade teacher thought it was a great novelty, not just because I was a brown boy. Everyone else in my class was either white or black, but also because I had long hair. Now it's a man bun today, but I used to have a big ponytail. And the teacher thought I had pretty brown eyes and it was really cute and strange. And so she decided one day to dress me up like a girl in front of class, put some barrettes in my hair, a little makeup. She and the kids had a great laugh. I went home feeling humiliated, and I never told my parents what happened till I was an adult. But I did tell my mom, I want a haircut, and I got one. I never grew my hair out again till college. And there were more cascading and rippling effects from that experience for me for years afterwards. But for that teacher, she was kind of oblivious. I think most of us could see that teacher had some issues, both around race and gender. And ultimately, that's an example of a micro level racial incident. At the meso level are things like systems, policies, and procedures. So for example, in 2014, in the town of Seminole, Texas, there was a white couple that had moved to town, and they had a full-blooded Navajo kid who was taken in as a foster child in temporary placement. The public school there had a rule that said boys need a haircut above the collar. And the parents responded, well, we don't feel very comfortable with this because we only have temporary placement of this child. We don't even have permanent placement. And if we cut his hair, it might even be considered assault because it could, emotionally traumatize him. And the school gives a response, well, if you can prove that he's an enrolled member of a federally recognized tribe, and also authenticate that this is an important part of his religion, we can petition the school board for a variance. And so in this case, there wasn't anybody, with racial malice. They weren't trying to hurt him. It's just the Bible Belt. And in that place, kids were expected, if they were boys, to have a haircut above the collar because that seemed normal. And oftentimes things at the meso level are just a definition of normal that's kind of built around, whiteness or things that are dominant traits in white culture. The folks who sell Band-Aids, are not trying to hurt people of color when flesh-colored Band-Aids only matched one color of flesh. Today, they're actually starting to remedy that with clear tabbed Band-Aids and now Band-Aids with different colors and so forth. But they weren't trying to hurt anybody. It just seemed normal to have, pinkish, tannish colored Band-Aids. So in any event, that's an example of a meso-level racial dynamic. And then there's also the macro level stuff. It's just kind of like cultural smog that we're all breathing all the time. And here it means we all get the racist jokes, even at a very early age, even if we don't think that they're funny. We are all enculturated to race in the same space. And as a result, it's just harder to see and it's easier to misunderstand. Exacerbating this, if someone wants to say, hey, let's talk about race, we have some data sets that say students of color are disciplined at a very different rate than our white students in this school, or we have a problem with this policy or procedure, then a lot of times what they're talking about there is something at the meso level, systems, policies, and procedures. But someone may respond to that by saying, how dare you bring that up? I'm a good person. And so they think that somebody saying, hey, let's examine our policies and procedures is an attack on their character, and they're being accused of individual racist acts. But that's not what's being said. And a lot of times we misunderstand one another because someone's talking about something here and somebody else is hearing something about down here. The fact that there is racism in America doesn't mean that all white Americans are bad people. And a lot of times that is not well understood. The same thing if someone wants to talk about white privilege. Sometimes, somebody is hearing, you're telling me that I'm advantaged, but I'm white and I'm poor. And I'm the descendant of poor Irish people who were persecuted for who they are. But that's not what's being said. White privilege extends to many different things. It's not about money. It's the privilege of going to school and having your race widely represented in the stories that are told and taught about who helped make America a great country. If you're Native American like me, you didn't get those stories. It means having your race widely represented in the body of people who are doing the teaching. It's things like this. And oftentimes we misunderstand. One's talking about one thing and one is talking about another. And the third main driver that makes it really difficult to talk about race is simply fear. One dimension of the fear is something that some people will call white fragility. Sometimes putting those words together makes people bristle a little bit. But what is meant by that is that white Americans, for starters, have been highly insulated from extreme racial discomfort. So, white people can go to, East LA, or an Indian reservation, but they can also go home. And ultimately, as a result, like even a white person can travel America, can travel internationally, and will often be accommodated. Someone will speak to them in English, and it will be easy for them to be insulated from even the linguistic discomforts. If you're a person of color, you don't have that experience. When I go out and look for the person who's in charge, well, I'm often looking at somebody from a completely different racial group. And I get used to that kind of racial discomfort. The other thing that happens, and so there's kind of like an exercise that I do, even though I'm not looking to exercise, right? I might go to Home Depot and someone will say, oh, can you go clean up on aisle 3? Even though everybody who works at the Home Depot wears a blaze orange apron that says the Home Depot, and I could be dressed like this, but I'll still get those kind of comments. Or if I show up dressed up very nicely, suit and tie, someone will say, oh, the limo driver's here, great. And there'll be this assumption that I'm dressed out of my economic station because it doesn't look like the racial caste that I've been assumed to belong to, right? Or the economic caste I'm expected to belong to because of my race. And so these things happen to me often, and I get it so often that it doesn't have to wreck my day. For better and for worse, I'm kind of used to dealing with that. So for me and for other people of color, it's like We are out there every day we go out, we are going to the gym. We are exercising a certain musculature for dealing with racial discomfort. And some days I just feel like the Hulk, right? For a lot of white Americans, that musculature doesn't get exercised as much and it's kind of atrophied. And so when someone says, we want you to do a little racial lifting, it feels radically uncomfortable. The other thing is that there is an expectation that a lot of white Americans have to be racially comfortable. And it's a kind of an unreasonable expectation that people of color don't have. We expect racial discomfort. And so it's the expectation that leads to the disappointment. In addition to that, Americans are really steeped in the culture of colonization. And although there's a lot to unpack around that, one of the defining features of colonization is taking one culture and language and using it to supplant others. It's about erasure. So naturally, one of the greatest fears of someone who is steeped in that culture of colonization is fear of their own erasure. And so our demographic shift is just freaking out some people because they're afraid it will mean they will be disempowered, they will lose advantage, they will be forgotten, they will be erased. And it's an unfounded fear, even though the demography is obvious. Already the majority of the K-12 students in America are students of color. That's who's here. And it doesn't matter Democrats or Republicans building a wall or not building a wall. That's who's here. And that's our future. If America getting browner is like the sinking of the Titanic, we hit that iceberg ages ago. Rearrange the furniture, all you want. In addition, anytime there has been big shift or change, it has stoked this fear because we are steeped in this culture of colonization. For example, when the women's suffrage movement was going on 100 years ago, many men were terrified that women getting the right to vote, or worse yet, entering the workforce, was going to diminish the power of men, was going to ruin the economy, was going to destroy the financial, opportunities of men and take their jobs. And of course, when we look back now, we know the opposite was true. As women got the right to vote, it did not diminish the power of men. In fact, 83% of the political positions in the world are still occupied by men. The stock market took off like crazy, though, as women entered the workforce, even though men owned almost all of the stocks. It was primarily a financial benefit for them. And today, now that women have the right to vote and the right to work and things like that, men are not economically hurt by that because their families can be two-income families as well. And most Americans rely upon both incomes to create the lifestyle that they're accustomed to. If people of color do better in school, finish high school, get jobs, go to college, get better jobs, it doesn't take jobs from white folk. It means that everybody becomes a load-bearing citizen paying taxes rather than a leech upon the government. And it means that everybody gets more fully humanized and has access to opportunity. When it comes to money, that part is a pie that grows as more people get more money. When it comes to rights, equal rights for women didn't make less rights for men. Equal rights for people of color doesn't make less rights, for white folk. And in fact, if the teacher can work faster with your neighbor's kids, they can work faster with your kids too. And in fact, if your neighbor's house value goes up, guess what? It drives your house value up too. The late senator from Minnesota, Paul Wellstone, said, "We all do better when we all do better." And it's so true. as we go forward, lean in, read, talk to people who have perspectives different from your own. Take all those folk you want to give a good talking to and give them a good listening to. And that's for people of all political persuasions. As you lean in, show up with the best version of yourself. Stay engaged. Develop some sonar and be brave. After all, even though it's difficult talking about race, it's obviously one of the most important things that we can do at this trying time. Thank you so much. Miigwech. Thanks for watching today. I'm Anton Treuer. Let's keep in touch. I'm active on social media, and my website has lots of information on my books, speaking engagements, free Ojibwe language resources, resources for teachers, and more. Miigwech.